Okay, this lesson for the Cornet Project class, I'd like to address things that I personally have missed. That is, omissive errors, blind spots preventing me from seeing, priming according to tradition, fallible constructs, formed categories, or as known in the vernacular jargon sometimes when it's not very highly understood or well respected. So, for example, the rapture, for 40 years, I know more than that, perhaps. I would ask people about it, my friends especially, when they would mention rapture. But they'd never mention rapture. They'd always say pre-trib or post-trib or mid-trib. And Dr. Walter Martin of the Christian Research Institute said it's all tribulation, move on. And he was talking about the preoccupation with that 7-year period of time in relationship to pre, mid, and post. And my question wasn't that at all. Mine was, how was it attached to the Great Tribulation or the 70th week? For example, some of us as children had been around people who believed in divine days. I think that's one of the old terms for it. So that we would say one, 2, 3, 4, and then since Christ, we've had 1, 2 for a total of 6,000 years. So I knew that when Christ returned, it would be at the end of the age and set up a seventh day, is the way commonly spoken of, this 1,000-year reign, which I was just shocked because I was always waiting, knowing that any moment, imminent return, not return, but any minute, Jesus could come back. So, we go along we know now he wasn't planning to arrive or even, and this was even rapturous in the last 2,000 years. And this is where the big Y2K came along, and there was 88 Reasons in 1948, and there were all types of things, but none of them really were what I was asking. And my dear friends didn't know any better. They just would say, well, the word rapture is not in the Bible, but neither is Trinity, which I have no idea what that meant, except they couldn't hear what I was asking, and I couldn't explain it. So in Matthew 24, for example, Matthew 24, where it says after the tribulation, well, that always made me think, well, that has nothing to do with us. That's far at the end of the age in that 70th week. So when I looked the word up, it's this term meta. That's meta, which you look it up, it means in association with. So that helped me now understand when we get to this 70th week in the futurist construct, this 70th week. And then I was recently listening to a podcast by Dr. Robert N. Wilkin explaining, because of the number 1290, it could be 30 days prior, 30 days before this 70th week of Daniel. Now, I don't have a problem with the 70th week. That is the 483 years times 360 days equals 173,880. And that's between March 14th. We've discussed this before. March 14th, 445 BC, and the AD 32, April 16th, which is exactly this number of days, the triumphant entry of Christ. And then we have this 7-year period, this 1 week of 7 years. But for me, I was always living in the moment that who made the rapture, and I'll just mark this span here from 1290, here's the 1260, there's the middle. So who made this? Why we had the conversation? Now I understand that. It took a while for me to be able to communicate that who tethered it, if you will, who tethered it to or associated it with tribulation, because that was my first question, and I could never find anyone to answer it because most people weren't really thinking about it. We were just told, always be ready. And we were. We always knew that at any moment we could be gone or Jesus would appear and we would be called to meet him in the air. And so that was very much a governing principle that was very influential. Now that we've gone 2,000 years since Jesus has ascended, now that we know why it's in association with these, because as someone from a background in, let's say, projects, construction, commercial, whatever you call it, I was scaling the implications of, well, I don't see any earth movers working in the Middle East and in Jerusalem or beginning to build a temple and all that. So I was thinking, well, how am I able to be raptured at any time since Jesus left and all of that? But every time people talk about the rapture, they'll say pre, mid, or post, and yet that was what was missing. So I was glad to understand that. So the other thing, for example, that we've studied, and this is one here, it's harmless. It just took me a while to understand and find out for myself what was it. And it's this word here in association with the same word Jesus used in the Great Commission. He would be in association with us, speaking to those whom he sent out. And he was conducting his churches, working with us, associating with us in the work of making disciples. And that's what we do. So then number 2, you all might remember this one, 1 John 5:1. And it was quite a controversy because this is the one that the highest Calvinist of whom I'm aware, Dr. James R. White, he uses it to show that regeneration precedes faith. And we noticed that, and I'll just write parts of it, the one who is believing, remember this is a noun, so the one who is believing, and it's a gerundive noun. There we go, gerundive noun. So the one who is believing that Jesus is the Christ, and I won't have room for all that, but we have that perfect passive indicative reduplicated stem from genao. There we go, gegenetai. You see that reduplicated stem? And you can see genao in here. That verb for fathered or begotten, and it's perfect passive indicative. So that means has been. Now notice this previously. Fathered, generated, and then of course I even wrote the word produced out from the God. That is prior to being this believer. So this perfect tense, it says that we have been produced. We've been fathered, generated, produced prior to becoming. So we're the product of generation. And generation is a process. That's a process. And we know in 1 Corinthians 4:15, it's through the gospel. Through the gospel. You notice how the Bible just seems elusive to our constructs. We just can't quite pin the Bible down to match our constructs. For me, it was very, not exasperating, but you could never really have a conversation because people were just simply interested in saying pre, post, or mid. And my question was, how does the only thing about the rapture have to do with something that could be just 30 days out from it? And for others, it could be 1 or 2 years into it. You remember we came out from, they were those who came out from the Great Tribulation. We don't have anyone that went through it. We don't have that word, that preposition. But anyway, we go back here and we notice all this angst about regeneration, or regeneration precedes faith. And regeneration is a process, and the person produced, the believer, is a noun. So this is the believer. The believer. That's a noun. This functions as a noun. So we have we'll just draw the process here. And this will help those who want to know what's the big deal. And here will be the gospel. And then here will be the output. So this is the product here. So this is the product. So you take one, as we learned, the apistos, the one without faith, the without faith one, and then through the gospel, then we have the believer as the product. And you're always being the product. That was something else that was quite elusive. It's easy to forget, but once you've been fathered through the gospel, you're always being fathered. And this is absolutely correct. So it doesn't support regeneration precedes faith the way people hear it. We all would agree, as what the Bible actually says, the process of being regenerated is the means, the gospel is the means through the gospel, Paul said. And the product is the believer. And you're always the believer. Even if you're so bewitched as the churches in Galatia, all these Gentiles who had trusted Jesus for everlasting life, received everlasting life, were fathered. Children now become children of God through the preaching of the gospel. They'd even come out, baptized, covenanted together, and were functioning as bodies of Christ there. And that is, each one was Christ's body 100%, and there they were. And they had been so dissuaded away from Christ, they had begun to follow those who were teaching a different gospel, which is not even another gospel. So they were still, will always be this. This is perfect tense, so that's always there. So these are the types of things, priming and unable to communicate, because you wouldn't believe how many people had no interest in talking because they could only hear me asking what they assumed I was asking. And I wasn't even asking about the word rapture. I was asking about how did this become associated? Well, they didn't know either. I learned later. And I spoke with some people just yesterday about it. And they said, no, that's just where they started. So when we came into the world and we were faithful to be in our Sunday school, and we were faithful to be in assembly, and we were faithful to be at VBS, and we went back for Bible training and Baptist training course and midweek prayer services, we were just talking about pre, mid, or post. And yet we were always reminded the way we were living to always be ready, for we did not know in what hour the Lord might return. And yet we still had people talking about this. Well, for me, this was always far out there at the end of the age, and I was looking for things to be implemented, literally construction. I've heard people say, we've got a red heifer. Well, that red heifer they told me about 50 years ago is long dead. And attempts to lay a cornerstone, even have old videos you can find out there, and YouTube especially, and where they were trying to lay a cornerstone, I think as long ago as the 70s. And then you can remember the 88 reasons in 48, all those things that we all remember and lived through. But this really helped me to understand why it was ever associated with this in the first place. It just seems to make me wonder, how do I balance that with the imminent disappearance of God's people when it could be as late in history as just 30 days from that week? So we're all in this margin of error now. I don't really know who would argue about Christ's return now. We're at the end of every age. So this is good stuff. It's just an example of what can happen when we are shaken. Our schema is shaken and we react emotionally rather than evaluate it, review and revise it and process it. So let me get out of the way, let you look at this and notice what the case really is and how easy it is for, I've got an old Bible, Salem Curban Study Bible. I've got an old Reese Chronological Study Bible. And when you go back and read those things, you'll read a lot about eschatology. But again, I was wondering how it ever, my low educated idea, low informed, if you will, I was waiting any minute since 1962 until today. I was born in 62, so especially when 80 came along and 88 came along, we were actually in services on a Sunday, Lord's Day, and people went out in our parking lot and left pamphlets about 88 reasons why. My first point was, how could they be skipping church to spread the news of the imminent return and rapture? So anyway, you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson, but think about, do you really want to bridge the gap between your ignorance, like myself, my ignorance, and the Bible, or do you just want to banter with someone else? It could be blind spot versus blind spot. So have a blessed day.